What if I told you that one of history's most brilliant minds was just an architect of stone, but a healer of flesh? What if the same man who dared to design the world's first pyramid also pioneered principles of medicine that would echo through millennia? This is the untold story of Imhotep, a man remembered by most as a builder of monuments, but whose greatest legacy may not lie in limestone, but in saving lives. Today we peel back the sands of time to reveal Imhotep, not just as Egypt's master architect, but as one of the world's first physicians. A man whose knowledge rivaled Hippocrates centuries before Hippocrates was even born. Imhotep lived around 2600 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser of the Third Dynasty. His rise was extraordinary. He was born not a prince but a commoner, yet through sheer brilliance he became vizier, high priest, scribe, astronomer, engineer, and architect. It was Imhotep who conceived the Step Pyramid of Saqqara, the world's first monumental stone building. Before this, Egyptian tombs were mastabas, flat-roofed rectangles made of mud brick. Imhotep dared to imagine stacking mastabas one on top of the other to form a staircase to the heavens. This was more than architecture. It was theology in stone, a symbol of Pharaoh's eternal ascent to join the gods. The Step Pyramid rose nearly 200 feet, a marvel of engineering. Corridors stretched underground, chambers interlocked like a labyrinth. For the first time in human history, stone became the language of eternity. But even as the pyramids stood as Imhotep's triumph, another story quietly unfolded, one written not in stone, but in papyrus and human memory. For in addition to being Egypt's first great architect, Imhotep was remembered as a physician, a healer. A man whose wisdom of the body was so profound that centuries later he was worshipped as a god of medicine. Why do we only know him as a builder? The answer is simple. Stone survives, papyrus does not. The Step Pyramid still towers over Saqqara after 4,600 years, but scrolls crumble. Oral traditions fade. Dynasties rise and fall, rewriting history. And yet, fragments remain. Texts written centuries after his death, the Edwin Smith Papyrus and the Ebers Papyrus, contain echoes of Imhotep's medical tradition. Ancient historians like Manetho and Greeks like Diodorus remembered him not just as builder, but as sage and healer. He became a legend not only for designing monuments, but for designing methods of healing. Medicine in 2600 BC was a mixture of ritual and remedy. Disease was often seen as punishment from the gods or as the work of spirits. Many healers were priests who recited spells as much as they applied treatments. But Imhotep's approach was different. He looked at the physical body as something to be observed, studied, and treated. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, though copied centuries after Imhotep, reflects a way of thinking that may have originated with him. This document is unlike almost anything else from the ancient world. It is not filled with incantations. It is a clinical manual. Case after case is presented with logical detail. A patient has a skull fracture. The papyrus describes how to palpate the wound, how to check for movement of the skull, and even how to determine prognosis. A man suffers a dislocated jaw. Papyrus outlines how to press the jaw back into place, a method still recognizable in modern medicine. A wound bleeds heavily. Papyrus advises how to stop the bleeding, bandage the injury, and apply herbal antiseptics. And then there is one chilling phrase that shows the honesty of Egyptian medicine. This is a case I will not treat. In other words, some injuries were too severe. It's better to acknowledge reality than give false hope. This wasn't mysticism. This was observation, diagnosis, prognosis, treatment, the very foundations of scientific medicine. 2,000 years before Hippocrates, Imhotep may have already been practicing what we now call rational medicine. Imagine it. A worker on the pyramid falls, breaking his leg. He is carried into the healing chamber. Imhotep examines the leg. He palpates the bone, notes the swelling. He orders a splint made from reeds and linen. Honey is applied to a cut to prevent infection. The worker is told to rest, his leg immobilized. Another man arrives with a gaping wound from copper tools. The wound is washed with beer or vinegar, packed with honey, wrapped with linen. A soldier limps in with a dislocated shoulder. Imhotep's students rotate the arm, maneuvering it until the bone slips back into place with a satisfying pop. These scenes may sound like modern emergency care, but they happened 4,600 years ago in a land where Imhotep's methods stood far beyond their time. The Nile was Egypt's pharmacy. Along its banks grew herbs and plants that became the lifeblood of Egyptian healing. Garlic, used for stamina and immunity. Coriander, for digestion. Willow bark, for pain relief, the same active ingredient found in aspirin. Aloe vera, for burns. Pomegranate, to fight parasites. The Ebers Papyrus, written 1,000 years after Imhotep, preserves over 700 remedies, but many likely traced back to traditions he began. Honey was a favorite. The Egyptians knew it preserved food. Imhotep knew it could also preserve life, preventing wounds from festering. But Imhotep's brilliance wasn't just in herbs. It was in combining natural remedies with surgical innovation. The Edwin Smith Papyrus describes stitching wounds, immobilizing fractures, even brain injuries. One case describes how to observe the movement of cerebrospinal fluid. Imagine the beginnings of neurosurgery in 2600 BC. This was not superstition. This was science. And yet, Imhotep never ignored the spirit. The Egyptians believed illness was both physical and spiritual. Healing rituals included prayers, incantations, and offerings. But perhaps Imhotep understood something deeper: the power of belief, the strength of the human will to recover, what we now call the placebo effect, Imhotep's world called divine blessing. To heal the body, calm the mind. To treat the wound, restore hope. This holistic approach, science blended with spirituality, gave Egyptian medicine a resilience unmatched by other ancient systems. Imhotep's reputation grew long after his death. Temples dedicated to him became centers of healing. Pilgrims came seeking cures, leaving offerings in his honor. Eventually, Imhotep was deified, one of the very few mortals in Egyptian history elevated to godhood. He became the god of medicine and healing, a divine figure invoked by the sick. Scholars speculate that Hippocrates himself may have been influenced, directly or indirectly, by Imhotep's tradition. The parallels are striking. Both emphasized observation, diagnosis, and ethical judgment. Both saw medicine as a craft rooted in logic, not superstition. But Imhotep came first. By more than 2,000 years, Imhotep was not a man of one talent, was a true polymath. He designed the first pyramid, wrote wisdom, literature, and poetry, studied the stars, aligning temples with celestial bodies. He calculated measurements, laying foundations for geometry, and he healed, pioneering diagnosis and treatment. To him, knowledge was one interconnected web. Architecture, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, all threads of the same fabric. Perhaps his study of anatomy informed his architecture. Understanding the strength of bone may have inspired his mastery of stone. Perhaps his belief in eternal life shaped both his medicine and his monuments. This is the scope of Imhotep's genius: vast, interconnected, timeless, and he blurred the line between man and God. And yet his story is still buried. His name, often overshadowed by pharaohs, deserves to be remembered not just as builder of pyramids, but as one of the first true scientists in history. When we think of the history of medicine, we often start with Greece. But perhaps the story begins earlier in the desert of Egypt, under Imhotep's gaze. When we speak of timeless architecture, we think of Rome or the Renaissance. But Imhotep was the first to carve eternity from stone. Imhotep challenges us to ask, how many other visionaries have been flattened into one role by history? How many polymaths have we forgotten? Imhotep was more than an architect, more than a healer, more than a man. He was a reminder of what humanity can achieve when imagination meets observation, when compassion meets intellect, when we dare to look at the world not as it is, but as it could be. In stone, he built eternity. In medicine, he built principles that still endure. And in memory, he became divine. The true story of Imhotep is not just the story of Egypt. It is the story of us, of our eternal quest to understand, to create, to heal.